everyone, it is Katie here from the Queen of Teen Fiction, and it is time to share with you the books that I have been reading throughout July. So I managed to finish reading 6 books in July, which to be honest is something of a miracle considering I was stressing out over Camp NaNoWriMo throughout the whole month. Every time I sat down to read I felt guilty because I knew I should be writing, but I still managed to read 6 books, so it's all good. So the first book that I read is on my Kindle. I apologise if the lighting messes up when I hold the Kindle up because it likes to do that. I have no lights, so I just have to let my camera deal with everything, unfortunately. So the first book that I read in July is The Kingsmen by Nora Sakavic. That's the cover there. I'm gonna hold the Kindle down now so it doesn't mess with the light. The Kingsmen is the final book in the All for the Game series that I've been reading over the past couple of months. I do not want to talk too much about this book just now because I do actually want to do a discussion video about the whole series at some point, but basically it is everything that you could want in a final book of a series. I always get nervous about final books because there's a lot of pressure, you have a lot of expectation, but this book completely delivered. And it tore me apart whilst reading it. This had me in tears. There were some really, really emotional scenes. Poor Neil. He goes through so much and he just deserves to be happy. But as I said with the second book, I don't really know how to summarise it for you, with it being the final book in a series as well. So just know that I utterly loved it and I was happy with the outcome for all of the characters. It was one of those books that I procrastinated reading because I didn't want it to end. And I had several people telling me on Tumblr to just get it finished so they could talk about it, and I was like, I don't want to let go. But yeah, I did finish it and I miss them so much. Poor children. Anyway, so that was the first book that I read in July. The next book that I read is Tell Us Something True by Dana Reinhardt. This is a contemporary story that follows a character named River after his girlfriend breaks up with him unexpectedly. River is one of the few people in LA who doesn't know how to drive, so he refuses to drive home with his girlfriend because she's now his ex-girlfriend, and instead decides to walk. He stumbles upon a support group called Second Chance and decides to go in because he sees it as like some sort of sign from the universe. This group is actually a support group for troubled teenagers, so these are kids that are addicted to drugs, they have bulimia, or they're stealing. River realises that he's out of his depth there and decides to fake an addiction to marijuana in order to fit in. So the summary of the book sounded really interesting to me, and River sounded like a very quirky character, so I was excited to read it. But this book really disappointed me, unfortunately. I wanted to like it so much more than I actually did, but I couldn't. I didn't like River as a main character at all. I think the way he handled the breakup wasn't great. I know breakups are sad, and obviously it's very upsetting, but he kind of stalked his ex-girlfriend, Penny. After she broke up with him, he shows up at her house several times. He makes a few comments that I didn't agree with about her being a prude because she didn't have sex with him. He just wasn't a likeable character for me. And I felt really bad about saying that because I was looking through the other reviews of it on Goodreads and a lot of people seem to really like him and find him a relatable character. I just didn't get it at all. Also, I knew it was a contemporary, so I knew there'd be romance, but there was so much romance packed into this. When he's not pining over Penny, he meets a girl in Second Chance called Daphne, who is in the group because she's been stealing. Straight away, he ends up wanting to jump into a new relationship with her. And it's just, River, stop! Take a breather, you don't have to jump into another relationship. I really think you need to take some time to be with yourself and get your life in order. What was a real shame about this book is the minor characters were so fascinating. In the Second Chance group, there are 2 characters called Christopher and Mason. Christopher has an addiction to drugs and Mason has bulimia. I really wanted to get to know them better. What I loved about this book was that it showed teenagers getting help for their problems. It didn't glamorize drugs or theft. It showed these kids trying to overcome it. So I really would have liked to have seen more of that, but we just didn't get it because it was too much about River and Penny. So this is just a book that wasn't for me, basically. It just had too much focus on romantic relationships and it didn't take the opportunity to expand on the other issues within it. The next book that I read this month is This Raging Light by Estelle Laurie. This book follows a character called Lucille. She is looking after her little sister Wren because their mother has decided to just up and leave them, basically. She said that she's trying to clear her head and that she'll be back soon, but she doesn't come back and they don't hear from her apart from a little bit of money occasionally. And so Lucille is Wren's sole carer and they have to hide it from everyone around them for fear of Wren being taken away from Lucille by social services. The only two people that know about this is her best friend Eden and Eden's twin brother Digby. Throughout this book, Lucille struggles to look after her sister, and she also starts to have more intense romantic feelings for Digby, who has already got a girlfriend. Once again, this is a book that definitely disappointed me slightly. I'd heard a lot of buzz about it, so I was very excited to read it. Basically, I really loved the writing of this story. The style of writing was quite poetic, and also Lucille's emotions were really well written. You could definitely feel her pain through the words in this book. But the romance aspect of it didn't interest me as much because I didn't really feel that connection between her and Digby. I did love the fact that it showed a dysfunctional family situation. I think that side of the story was written really well, and there were a few really good plot twists here and there. So this is one of those books that really has me torn because whilst I loved some of it, there were parts of it that I disliked too much. The next book that I read this month is Songs About a Girl by Chris Russell. This book follows 16-year-old Charlie Bloom, who has a real passion for photography. When this book starts, she receives a message from a former student at her high school, Ollie Sampson. However, Ollie Sampson just so happens to be one quarter of the world's hottest boy band, Fire and Lights. He remembers her from her days at school and has seen some of her gig pictures that she'd taken for her school's band. So he invites her to take some backstage pictures of the band before a gig for their fan club's website. She's really not interested in Fire and Lights, but her best friend Melissa is the world's #1 fan of this band. And so Charlie ends up taking the opportunity and she gets sucked into the world of this very famous boy band. I should have really disliked this book. I have read a few books before that feature very famous boy bands that end up forming a connection with a very average girl, and I usually do not like these books at all. I find them cheesy and predictable. I find the boy bands very cliche, but this book was really fantastic and I was honestly shocked at how much I ended up enjoying it, because honestly, books like this usually do not appeal to me at all. I think what I loved about it so much is the boy band itself, Fire and Lights. I really adored the chemistry and the humour between these boy band members. The author of this book was genuinely in a band himself, so although he wasn't in one that was as famous as the band in this, he knows about the industry, he knows what goes on backstage, he knows what it's like to be in a boy band that are travelling the world. And I think that really shows in the writing of this book. And the characters were just really great. I love Charlie and her friendship with Melissa. I related to Melissa so much because every time Charlie mentioned something that she was doing with the band, Melissa's responses were just fantastic. They were all in caps lock, like a million exclamation points. That's me. That is me. Not really so much over bands, but I'm like that over my favourite TV shows and books. So yeah, I could really relate to Melissa's dialogue a lot. What I also loved about it is it doesn't shy away from the darker sides of everyone knowing who you are. When it gets out that Charlie is a photographer for the band, she ends up getting so much abuse from trolls. Her phone number gets leaked to a website, and it's just non-stop abuse. And the scariest part about that is that really happens, so I'm glad that the book showed that side of things as well. But yeah, it was a mostly light read, it was fun, and I enjoyed it a lot more than I intended to. I'm so glad that I got a chance to read it. So the next book that I read this month is Am I Normal Yet by Holly Bourne. Am I Normal Yet is a book that I have been meaning to read for such a long time, but it was just a book that I'd never got around to picking up. But this month I became part of a monthly book club. We pick a book each month to read and discuss, and this was our first pick, so I got to read it with a bunch of other people as well, which was really great. Am I Normal Yet is about 16-year-old Evie, who suffers from OCD. She's been working really hard to lessen her medication, and now she just wants to be normal like everyone else. She's just started college and she decides to go on a date with a cute boy. Things at this party end up going disastrously wrong, and she ends up talking instead to her childhood best friend Lottie and Lottie's friend Amber. The girls hit it off straight away and immediately form a bond. Eventually they form the Spinster Club in order to reclaim the word spinster, because the meaning of spinster usually means old woman with lots of cats, and they don't want it to mean that anymore. So they form this club so that they can have feminist discussions every week. And oh my god, I love these discussions that the girls have. They are so on point, and it's a great way to introduce feminism to young people. They do have a discussion that's entirely based on periods, and it just made me so happy to see periods openly discussed in a YA novel. Because although it's something that every young woman has to go through, you don't see it discussed. And they talk about how just the mere mention of periods makes people disgusted, even though it shouldn't. So these discussions just had me cheering internally, because yes, the other big part of this story is obviously Evie's struggle with OCD. I loved how honest this writing was about the harsh realities of mental illness. It doesn't shy away from it at all. Although I don't have OCD, I do suffer with anxiety, and I have struggled with hypochondria in the past. So some of the things that Evie was going through and some of the situations she found herself in, I could completely relate to them. At one point in the book, she mentions how learning about new illnesses and rare diseases, they just set her anxiety off because she worries about contracting them. Even though the chances could be 1 in a million, she will still worry about it, and that was something that I really felt, because I used to be like that all the time. I hated learning in school about diseases that I could possibly get. So some of these scenes made me really quite emotional, because I just understood perfectly what it was like to be in that frame of mind. So I loved Evie as a character, and I love how the book described her mental health. It was just perfectly written. So honestly, I'm just so glad that this book exists, and I wish that I'd have been able to read something like this when I was 16. The issues that it covers are so important. So thank you to Holly Bourne for writing a book that we all desperately needed. So the last book that I read in July isn't a new book, it's actually a reread. And it is of Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. I know I've reread this a couple of times and mentioned it on this channel, but Fangirl was one of the 6 books chosen for Zoella's book club, and I decided to take the opportunity to reread Fangirl during this time. It also meant that I could use my Fangirl bookmark that I painted a couple of weeks ago. I hadn't had the opportunity to use it until now, so yay! I've talked about this book so many times before on this channel, so you really don't need to hear me talk about it again. You already know that I think Rainbow Rowell is the 8th wonder of the world, so yeah, I won't drone on and on about how much I love her books. So yeah, they are the books that I read throughout July. Read stressfully throughout July, whilst I should have been writing. Please let me know what books you've been reading this month down in the comments. What has been your favourite book from this month, and also what are you planning to read next month? Also, do you like the sound of any of the books that I've mentioned today? Let me know all the things. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye!